Hello, Internet. Billy Rothard, aka Rothgard, here again with another episode of Deep Listens. Our good friend and fearless co-host leader Gino is off in a wedding wonderland somewhere and unable to participate for a little while, but luckily we got him covered. We got his back. I am joined, as always, by Peter, fresh from the barbershop, Busby.
Yeah, got that sweet cut. I was thinking high top fade, but they looked at me and they're like, I don't think that's the look for you. So I deferred to their greater
you
judgment.
ball hard enough. I mean, I feel like they should have
That's
just
what I'm
seen your
saying.
skill set.
Whatever. But again, our love to Gino, even as his deep, unyielding, abiding love disgusts us all. Forget his good fortune, but we'll carry on without him.
I mean, he wasn't lucky enough to get to play a cool game like Ori and the Blind Forest. This game was awesome.
All he got to do was get married.
Yeah.
Like a chump.
Thanks for the pick, Pete. So first things first, we're going to be talking about Ori and the Blind Forest. If you want to get in touch with the podcast, you should hit us up at deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com or deeplistenspod on social media, any of those other particular outlets. Also hit us up on iTunes. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, Libsyn, Radio FM, all those cool free podcast hosting sites. So rate and review and give us some feedback. From what I understand, there was no feedback from last week or any of the previous weeks. You guys are sounding pretty weak because we're basically talking to a silent audience of lovers. But we know you're out there. We see the numbers. So send us some love, send us some feedback. We'd love to hear from you always. So without further ado, Ori and the Blind Forest. Normally, I'm the person who breaks down the story, but since it's just me and Peter tonight, I'm gonna let Peter take care of the story intro for Ori and the Blind Forest. Let's roll.
All right, stepping up to the big leagues here. Let me give it a shot. Okay. So it takes place in a forest. I think that much is clear.
Yeah.
So you play as Ori. Ori is sort of a spirit guardian in this forest. When the game opens, there's a big storm, and Ori gets sort of shoved out of its home in the spirit tree, and it's adopted by this. I don't know. It's sort of a panda-looking. You know what it looks like? It looks like the thing from Big Hero 6.
Yeah, kind of. It's some kind of mix of that, like the Big Hero 6 robot and like a Hayao Miyazaki like furry creature.
Yeah, that's a good call too. So you're adopted by this creature. It's called Naru, and sort of you live with Naru for a little while, but the forest is deteriorating further and further, and eventually some things happen, and it comes to pass that Ori has to go out and save the forest by traveling through these areas, sort of a Metroidvania sort of style. I think that's pretty good for non-spoiler coverage of story.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. This game definitely fits the bill for Metroidvania. There are lots of beautifully rendered worlds that are all connected, almost entirely accessible from the start of the game if you can reach them. You know, certain things like mobility upgrades or certain offensive abilities that can double as opening paths, let you go to new areas. But it definitely does feel like a very beautifully rendered, artistic design of a Metroidvania style game. As far as story goes, I think you nailed it. We don't get that much intro to our protagonist, Ori. I think it was just like some kind of leaf off of a tree or petal just spawns some little cute furry lemur type creature.
Yeah, some sort of spirit forest guardian thing.
Right. Very, very early in the game, we meet our first companion. I guess besides Naru,
Yeah.
our next companion is this sort of guiding light, pseudo Navi from Legend of Zelda type
thing. Pretty much the same deal, except she's actually useful for her offensive capabilities.
True. So I think the name is pronounced Sane, or Sane, something like that.
Yeah, Sane's
anyway, so Sane is effectively a cursor on the screen, but also sort of your only offensive measure. In this game, they completely divided the offensive capabilities, well, not completely divided, but for the most part, divided mobility and offense between the two characters.
At least initially.
Yeah, at least initially.
And even the offensive moves you get double as mobility movements, which I thought was a nice touch on their part at the very least.
That's definitely a throwback to some of the classic Metroid Mechanics. I played more Metroid games than Castlevania games, so my knowledge set comes from that area. And almost all of your um, non-projectile upgrades are mobility moves that double as attacks. I'm thinking about stuff like the Shine Spark from Metroid, which blows through enemies if they're weak enough, and like the Screw Attack from Metroid Prime, for example, or other Metroid games. They basically give you an additional jump, but also damages enemies. So
Now, whenever I think Metroidvania, I always think keys. It seems like you're always trying to get keys, but in Ori, no keys.
right. I think the Castlevania storylines focus more around artifacts or keys, or you get
Okay.
like a password to go behind a painting or something. And the Metroid style games, usually you unlock some kind of weapon or upgrade. I mean, you get that kind of stuff in Castlevania as well. Um, but it's more about getting keys and artifacts in Castlevania and more about getting physical capabilities in a Metroid game. And I think Ori here did, I guess, a mix of both because you have to have very specific physical abilities to open certain pathways. So, from a strictly mechanical perspective, the world is entirely available. Well, the world is closed off to you because there are certain things that you can't reach or you can't interact with yet.
Right.
But you can see it all. It's all available for you to access should you be able to reach it. Now, I'm saying this so specifically because I kind of broke parts of the game when I just sort of mashed my face against the mobility mechanics enough. I think I got some places that I shouldn't have been able to go, like earlier in the game, and we'll cover that stuff later. But let's jump into some of the first mechanics. We've already gotten to this, but let's sort of break apart what the combat mechanics look like. And that's one of the first things that this game lets us play around with. So
Sure.
tell us about Sane's combat capabilities.
So Sane, for the most part, is your projectile character. Like she's going to, she,
It,
he,
I
it,
think it's I
they,
think it's a she.
she. We'll run with she. Whatever. She mostly just sort of shoots out projectiles, and they track basically for the most part, right? You don't have to aim; they just hit your characters, and a lot of its emphasis not so much on the difficulty of combat or fighting, in the way like a Castlevania game might be. This one's more about moving yourself into position, and then later on you get some more mobility-based combat where it becomes a little bit more interesting. But even so, it's not so much about, oh man, how am I going to kill these things? The killing basically takes care of itself.
True, and I think that takes some of the pressure off the player to develop a sense of combat efficacy.
Hmm.
Where in some games you have to worry about maybe like your build order. Let's think about a great game, Valda's Story, for example.
Great game. Game of the year, some might say.
Some might say it was Game of the Year 2015, but that game you can sort of pick a bad build order for your combat and you're in real trouble. And for Ori, you never have to worry about that because a lot of times there's no enemies and no bosses and no time of the game where you need like a hard DPS check
Hmm.
or some kind of hard um, like combat prowess. Most of the bosses in this game are defeated by dealing instances of damage as opposed to massive amounts of damage. So like maybe they'll trigger a vulnerable state. You like hit them 3 times and then they're dead. That's closer to what some of the boss fights are in this game as opposed to I need to have like a Dark Souls DPS check and deal massive amounts of damage, and if I don't, I'm gonna lose the war of attrition against a boss. It's not so much like that.
No, but one thing that does keep sort of the combat difficulty scaling, which I thought Ori did very well, is like you said, it's not a DPS check, but as you get on in the game, you have to kill enemies in sort of certain orders or at certain times. Like you need to make sure you kill enemies properly as a means of mobility. So it's definitely sort of checking your combat ability, but it's not like you said damage based. It's more exploration or mobility based.
It's definitely a puzzle. Like
Yeah.
the combat is a puzzle that you have to solve in a specific way. If you approach a situation and just destroy everything in the room, you might not be able to access the stuff that you want to do. I'm thinking about particular levels
Hmm.
where you need to use the enemy's position as much as your own to get into or like sort of to reach
Yeah,
reach
to
your
explore,
goals.
to advance.
Now let's talk about some of the cool upgradable combat. So the first thing that comes to mind is you have 3 tech trees in this game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a pretty simple, straightforward, very, very linear trees. We're not talking about any kind of like sphere grid from Final Fantasy X.
Nope.
No horseshit like that.
You get one, you can get the next.
Yeah, it's even simpler than something like Valda's story that has 3 paths of tech trees, but you have to make some like choices within them. No, this is straight up just 3 straight lines, and you can progress down either of them. If you get one, you can get the next one. Sometimes they
Can
cost
you?
a little more,
Yeah.
but
Can
that's
you
it.
max? I didn't max. I don't know if it's possible or not.
Max what?
Like, can you get all the abilities?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Um,
I
so
assumed you know the answer,
yeah.
whatever it was.
So there were 3 tech trees of upgrades in this game. One of them strictly dealt with combat efficacy.
Hmm.
One of them strictly dealt with mobility.
Hmm.
The third strictly dealt with your sort of efficiency, your upkeep. Like
Yep.
things healed you more. You used less of your resources or less of your mana to use your abilities.
Or you got more experience.
Or you gain more EXP. You
Yep.
ramp faster. Um, and then later in that particular tech tree, you unlocked like sensory ability. Like you can see where certain pickups are in the world. You get basically things added to your map to help you be more completionist. Um, crazy enough, I actually didn't. That was my last tech tree to finish.
Really? I
Yeah.
got to the like double experience, and I was like, all right, that's enough for now.
So let's talk about some of the ways combat gets upgraded.
Sure.
One of those tech trees does things like your little projectiles that come out of Sane. They come out faster, or more of them come out, or they
Mhm.
deal more damage.
Yep.
Right? There's also a couple of very specific upgrades, like a charge up attack that kind of creates an explosion.
Hmm.
Okay? On the other hand, there are some mobility kind of upgrades on the other side of the tech tree, which includes things like Ori can breathe underwater, Ori gets an additional jump, Ori gets, you know, like better like wall clings or wall runs, something like that. Or you get some kind of increased mobility mechanic, and that's actually the tech tree that I maxed out first because I knew that if I was going to be an explorer or like a grindy person, I really wanted to max out my mobility. I always wanted to maximize flow,
Yeah.
and I did that
And
by maximizing the mobility skill tree first. So tell us about some of the other kinds of upgrades, some of those area unlocking upgrades.
right. Well, I mean, just to talk about the tech tree, like you said, I went mobility too because there's really no reason to do combat.
Fair, yeah.
Like we said, like there's no DPS check. But those are your abilities. And conversely, let's just get this useless terminology right. You then have your skills, and your skills are sort of the basic moves of the game, right? So you got your standard ones, you got wall runs, you got double jumps. Like you said, there's that charge attack. My personal favorite, the one I thought was the most interesting at least, was Bash. And Bash was basically where you would lock on to one of these enemies and you would just launch yourself through them. And that would explode the enemy and also give you a speed boost, basically like a super jump. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about that combat mechanic, is that's what allowed you to get to more spaces, turn this into sort of more of a puzzle-based combat system as opposed to straightforward fighting.
Yeah, so I also think Bash was the best ability in this game, the best skill. I
Mm-hmm.
found that this is what unlocked so much of the game's complex mobility for me. This took
True,
it to a new level.
true.
I think that the triple jump for me was a very close second. Anytime I can get more jumps in a game, I'm loving it because it usually means that you get to sort of fiddle with the mechanics and sort of break stuff.
Yeah,
Um, People that design games will very often put things or put ledges in places that you can't get unless you have some extra mobility. But if I can sort of cheat my way around it in some way, I will I'll usually find a way to get around some level design. right? If there is a way, I will find it. Some of the earlier mobility mechanics is like wall jumping. They give you wall jumping pretty early.
Hmm.
Initially, wall jumping seems kind of clunky and not very elegant because you sometimes have to just wall jump on the same wall a bunch, kind of like hopping up it, and it's kind of mashing buttons to get to a higher platform because it's kind of inelegant by itself. Paired with later mobility mechanics, it gets fantastic and like the flow is great and it's aesthetically pleasing and it feels good. But early it's kind of clunky. You're just kind of like smashing your face against a wall jumping up it until you reach your destination. But if I unlocked triple jump, for example, I could wall jump, maybe triple jump to a place that I probably shouldn't be coming into contact with. Maybe one of those surfaces I can wall jump off of and sort of cheat my way up higher than I should. And I was able to find lots of collectibles that way, I think earlier than I should have in the game. Now, take a pause for a second. Should this kind of stuff be accessible? Should it be praised for me being able to do this? I'm not sure because it certainly wasn't the intention of the level designers. There was a way that they intended for me to get this collectible, whatever it was, and I didn't do it. I found some other way. I sort of like cheated my way around it by exploiting a mobility mechanic that I unlocked by just grinding
Yeah.
experience super early in the game. Um, how do you feel about using some mobility mechanic to cheat your way through some obstacle that I think the developers have a different intention for?
Yeah, I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I think sort of using cheat itself designates it as sort of a loaded term. I think you've just chosen an alternative execution. What bothers me about it is it's sort of, what do I want? It's sort of pedestrian, sort of prosaic to just add another jump as a mobility mechanic. You know what I mean? Like going from, single jump, double jump, triple jump. Hell, you could just add, quadruple, quintuple jump, whatever you wanted. That just seems a little obvious to me in the way that, like, by adding that, it makes Bash proportionately less important. And you're using a simpler, more straightforward mechanic to draw attention away from the more interesting one. The other thing, the other thing I didn't understand is why they included both wall jump and climb. Like why you would need to both be able to jump between walls or just climb up walls.
Yeah, they gave you an ability that just lets you kind of cling to a wall and run straight up it.
Yeah, which
But then they
why have
gave
wall
you
jump?
the wall jump ability that you could just use on the same wall over and over again.
Yeah.
Some abilities in other wall jumpy games say you can't wall jump off the same wall. You have to bounce from wall to wall back and forth. Like Mario games, for
Yeah, with a wall
example,
kick. That
wall
seems
kicks
insane.
have to change surfaces. And I think in Metroid games, actually no, I think that's not true. I think you can wall jump the same wall in a Metroid game if it's available to you, but the animation of the wall jump makes it really impractical in almost all cases to wall jump the same wall. Like they would have to like change like the wall structure for it to like make sense that you jump to it again. Now, one thing that I do think is interesting. This is sort of going back to actually Volda's story. They did something cool in one of their earlier developments of the game, and then they patched it out. If you remember in Volda's story, you got one of the souls, the lightning soul, that let you have the Vault Aura ability,
Yeah.
right? And that was one of your abilities that you got to open up a new part of the game.
Hmm.
They used to have double jump attached to that ability, and it was an attack. It was like an aerial attack that just made you also go higher. I think that would have been cool in the actual game. As it turned out, they patched it out of Volda's story and said we just basically deleted a possible cool ability and made it a jump. And so we wanted to give people another cool ability, so we made double jump show up somewhere else, and we made a new ability there. So I kind of like how Volda's story did that, but in Ori, I agree that just adding in sort of an arbitrary third jump. I mean, they already give you one double jump. They already give you your first additional jump, and then you can upgrade a third jump. And maybe that was excessive. I liked it just because I like hypermobility in games, but I agree that it took away from Bash, which is a really fucking cool ability.
What I'm trying to figure out which because that was one of your abilities, right? Was that third jump?
Where in Ori?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the tech tree,
Yeah,
the
survive. Yeah,
green tech tree.
it's the second to last one on one of the. Do you think they just ran out? And they're
Maybe.
like, we don't know what abilities, but so let's just third jump.
I
Sure.
don't know, but they also just gave you ultra defense at the end, which seems like out of place as well because it's not a really mobility based
Yeah.
like upgrade. It just says you take half damage now.
Which again, not like super useful based on how the game plays.
Yeah, I most of the time if you're gonna take a bunch of damage, you're just gonna instantly die from
Yeah.
something. So being able to take less damage doesn't matter that much. There's also a lot of times where you come into contact with stuff that just insta kills you no matter what. And that's what's really dealing damage to me is the obstacles that just insta kill me. Not really the stuff that I'm taking chip damage from. So it seemed kind of useless. I got it because I wanted to get them all, but
Yeah, right. I mean, might as well at that point.
true. So the last set of abilities, besides the mobilities, besides the combat efficiency, were things like higher environmental sustainability. And the first half of them were things like you get additional health from health drops. You
Hmm.
get additional magic from the magic drops. You like use less of them when you want to spend your magic or your meter or whatever on your abilities, and then like some of your abilities recharge faster and stuff. Then that's like the first half of the tech tree, and the second half of the tech tree does those things like you get to see this kind of pickup in the game, this kind of collectible in the game. You get to see these hidden map locations. You get to get more EXP from your kills. Okay, that kind of stuff seems cool. Um, but I never actually got it until the very end of the game. Those are some of the last things that I upgraded. I wanted to get mobility and combat first.
Yeah, I wasn't too concerned with the ability to see through walls, like on the maps. Like by the time, I don't know, I'm no expert. By the time you play these sorts of games, you pretty much know where the map's headed. You know what I mean?
I agree, and there's some kind of sixth sense that people that play a lot of games like this will develop and say, you know what, that artwork on that wall or that piece of level design looks really intentional. I'm gonna go mash my face into it. Oops, illusory wall.
It's like those old Hanna-Barbera cartoons where there were like three barrels and one of them was clearly drawn differently.
Yeah,
So you're like, I think that barrel's gonna do something in a couple seconds.
something's gonna come out of that Looney Tune drawer because its artwork is rendered so differently. Now, since I mentioned it and sort of skirted around it, I want to hit some of the collectibles really fast.
Sure, lay 'em on.
There's a couple of pretty easy ones, like you get additional health collectibles, you get additional magic collectibles, and then there's some collectibles that are just EXP dumps.
Yep.
There are some collectibles that are just a straight up level. You get a new level, bam, instantly, right? Now, as soon as I found out that there was, I guess I had to find out two things. The first thing I found out was there were pickups that just gave you a free level. Then I found out that the EXP that you get from enemy kills scales so that you need more EXP to go from level 25 to 30 than you do from level 0 to 5. Right? You can grind your early levels really fast, but your late game levels grind slow.
Yep.
Once I put those two things together, I said, ooh, I'm going to go find all those level things, but not get them. Instead, I'm going to wait until my leveling gets hard, then I'm going to go back and collect all of them and just ramp through the last 8 levels of the game.
Dude, you got to do less. Like this is like why I appreciate the thought that you put in. It's admirable in its way, but do less.
I maximize the efficiency of those upgrades, man.
Oh god, man. You
I,
think
I
Ori, like tiny little spirit fox, is like, come on. Like you think Ori's thinking about maximizing the efficiency of its level increases?
no,
No.
but I was, and I will. Okay, I cannot fight this at all. If this lemur thing actually saw a giant fucking glowy sphere of make myself stronger, he'd jump all over it.
Its brain would explode. Like that would be.
But me in grindfather form, I said, you know what? I can get the most out of these by waiting to use them until my levels get hard.
I can't tell if you're resisting like 20 years of gamer training and evolution or if you're just the pinnacle of it. Like you've been trained so well that you've passed the stage of just picking things up willy-nilly.
Have you ever heard that among the mythology of like light and dark magic, as you get further into like the purifying light healing magic, you actually get to like a dark magic. Like the further you get into the light magic, the more refined it gets. You actually reach like a higher level of like dark healing.
Sure.
Have you ever heard of
Whatever.
that before?
No.
All right, well, Gino would probably understand what I'm
Yeah,
talking
Gino would be
about
like, oh, yes, like in the
from this
Crimson
Final
Uppercut.
Fantasy game. um, Actually, one of the characters from Dota is the sort of character representation of that. Dazzle
And
is.
my eyes just glazed over the
As
second
soon as I said Dota. All
I
right,
was just
back to an actual good game, Ori. Um, yes, I should not have spent so much thought and gamer experience on maximizing my level upgrades, but I did. So what that did for me was it made me not. So it actually ended up doing something good for me, which was if I hadn't figured that out, I would have been forced to just not play the game and run around and just kill enemies or find spots where there was like a high EXP density and just run through that zone 80 times to grind levels. I
you're
didn't have
using
to do that.
forced wrong. That's not what the word forced means. Forced implies that you had to do something.
All right, you're right. I
That some
didn't.
external authority was making you do it.
All right. If some unseen force was compelling me to max the skill trees, I picked the lesser of two evils.
True. All right, I'll give you that one.
I could have
I'll
just
admit that.
I could have just smashed my face against enemies for hours on end until I grinded the last 5 levels, or I could have said, you know what? I waited to have my dessert, and I'm gonna go back.
Don't turn this into a character virtue. Like that's all of a sudden
I'm
like,
gonna
no,
go
I'm
back.
admirable. The
I
self-restraint I
waited.
showed.
The patience you show from getting a free level up, it pays off later, baby. You don't have to grind if you're just good at the game, right? Oh man, I'm in rare form today. So those are the collectibles, right? And here's what I like. Those collectibles were 100% optional. You didn't need any of them. They were there if you were an explorer and you wanted to find them, and I got great joy out of them. Somebody who doesn't care that much is going to miss out on nothing. They're going to be able to complete the game just as well. Maybe it'd be hard if they didn't find a bunch of the health pickups because maybe some stuff would kill them faster, but you're going to organically bump into a couple of these things at least. So you're going to have what you need. What I kind of don't like is Metroid Prime series, for example. That series is great, okay? But there are like hidden combat upgrades that are actually pretty hard to find if you don't know where to look for them. And some of them make certain boss fights way easier. They'd be so hard otherwise. One example, I think I'm thinking of this correctly, is in Metroid Prime, the first game. There's an upgrade for your plasma beam called the flamethrower, and if you're paying attention to your environment, you go through this hallway that seems like it's cracked and broken and you can do something with it. And if you do shatter those like the walls in that hallway, you like go under like the stage and you find just a hidden flamethrower upgrade there.
Just
It
chilling.
doesn't
Like, yeah, that's pretty
it's
cool.
not fucking intuitive at all. And it would make tons of boss fights way easier if you had that upgrade. Ori and the Blind Forest does not do that. None of its hidden stuff pays off huge combat benefits or pays off huge mobility benefits. Like
Uh,
in Valda's story, you can't get the double jump until you find
yeah.
Dayman, your assist buddy. Like
Yeah.
you have to find someone that's kind of hidden in order to get these things. Ori doesn't do that to you.
And as I recall, in Ori, there aren't. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there aren't any story pickups either, are there?
There's no like key item pickups, I think.
No, but
The
what I
only
mean is, like, there's no, like, Bioshock where you pick up the audio logs. There's nothing like that in Ori either, is there?
No. And
Yeah.
there's also no like hidden dialogues either. Like in
No.
Fury, a game that we just played, there were some areas where you could find hidden dialogue. I got 100% map completion, so I literally explored every inch of the game, and I didn't get any dialogue that was outside of the main story.
Yeah, so regardless in Ori, you're going to get the whole story if you complete the game,
If you
which,
complete the game, you get everything.
strengths and drawbacks to that sort of approach. We don't need to hash them all out. But,
Now let's talk about that more in the story part. But I
yeah.
think I think you might have stepped on some of your own toes there if you say that you don't like there being additional story or alternate ending kind of stuff. Like, does that conflict with you saying that it's okay for a game to just give you everything by completing it once? Or sorry, that it maybe has a drawback if a game gives you everything by completing it once?
I don't think there's necessarily, so from my personal perspective, I don't think there's necessarily too much of a drawback given some of the things I've said about gaming and storytelling. But I throw it out there because some people might be upset that you're not storily rewarded, let's say, for 100%ing the game.
All right. Yeah, so let's jump into a couple more things mechanically. First, this game got numerous awards for music and visuals. They were breathtaking.
Well deserved.
Soundtrack on point,
Well
right?
deserved.
It felt organic. Worlds came to life because of some of the music. I'm thinking there was one area that was kind of a poisoned swamp, and naturally part of correcting the problem of the forest is unpoisoning that swamp, and the soundtrack that you get after you finish it and you get to explore the world anew now that the water is clean, that was one of the most just visceral moments of the game for me.
I mean, just overall, excellent. Excellent design, excellent music. And if you go on YouTube and check it out, I watch some videos and sometimes they have to cut the sound out for copyright issues. It really is just not the same in a game like this.
And as far as aesthetics is concerned, I am blessed to be able to play on a computer that I built and has like a Ferrari graphics card and stuff. And so I could turn up ultra on these graphics, and man, is this game a treat
Mhm.
visually. I mean, they use a dichotomy of light and dark when it's appropriate. They don't overplay that, I think. They use really rich, vibrant colors. It kind of reminds me actually of Child of Light.
Yeah.
I think Child of Light had more tropey light darkness, like back and forth, but this had more, like I think, like organic, natural palettes of color.
Yeah, I think all that's true, and I think what you're alluding to it as well, especially when compared with Child of Light, is that Ori had a simplicity to it. Like there was a lot of use of sort of, I'm thinking of one specific character, and we'll get to that character, but there was a lot of sort of use of silhouette in which sort of things are implied as opposed to like, all right, we're going to render every individual pixel here. And for this game and the art style they chose, that sort of simplistic use of silhouette, of innuendos, a lexical term. It's about words, but sort of almost innuendo in suggesting things. I thought was particularly effective.
Yeah, and we don't need to go too deep into who these characters are yet, but we definitely will because they're very cool. But
Mm-hmm.
there was a very minimal amount of cast.
Yeah,
They accomplished a lot of
4.
story with like 5 characters.
Yeah, 5 if you count Sign, I guess.
Yeah, it's like Sane, Ori. You get two sort of like friendly supporting characters,
Yeah,
one bad guy, and the tree.
yeah, I guess if you count the tree, sure. Of course
Like
you're counting the
sure,
tree. Let's not undercut plants.
yeah, because I think you're probably gonna go off on how
Oh
sweet
my god,
forests are, man.
I'm gonna talk about plants so hard this podcast.
So let's jump into some of the other mechanics of this game. This is getting like slightly spoilery, but not too bad. So there's like 3 main dungeons. I wouldn't call them dungeons. Um,
Environments. All
it's not really environments because there's like 10 level. There's like 10 or 12 areas of the game,
yeah,
and then there's also 4 parts of the game that are like instance dungeons. That's what I was looking for. Maybe that term doesn't mean a lot to you, but in games like Path of Exile or Diablo or any other kind of MMO style game, they call them instance dungeons. And here's how it works: there's the whole big overworld that is available to you, and all of its mobility mechanics apply. Then you go to a place and you interact with it, and it like teleports you off the map to somewhere that
right.
isn't connected to the real world. So there's like there's 3 or 4 like instance dungeons,
Yeah.
but they're not dungeons in a spooky, scary kind of way. They're just extensions of what we already have.
Hmm.
So there's 3 or 4 like instance boss worlds, and at the end of all those worlds, something really cool happens.
It's the best, the best part of every single level.
Really? You think it's the best?
I like those escapes.
I don't think it's the worst, but I think, yeah, so let's just talk about it. We have these sick-ass escape missions.
Oh my god, I thought they were awesome. So it's things like there's rising water or, falling comets. Think of, if you want to parallel, let's use games we love. Think of Ocarina of Time when you beat Ganondorf and you got to run your way out of the castle. It's just like that. Like, you need to make sure your mobility is on point. You keep things moving as you escape these sort of environmental hazards. I love those parts, honestly.
Now, one of them bugged me, and it was, I believe, the wind level. I think that was probably.
Oh, we had to like put the leaf, it shot you up, cut it, you dropped.
Yeah. And that one I think kind of annoyed me because, well, here's something that I think is bad about those sequences is that if you die once, you have to restart the whole thing.
Yeah, that's a solid.
That's kind of bad. But then again, I think that if they had done checkpoints along the way, it kind of would have made it feel like you would have forgotten the first part of it. And so even though I didn't like having to do these levels 5 or 10 times before I got them right, and I think that is one critique, is that you shouldn't make a level that you're thrown into. Yes, you have all the mechanics available to you to one-shot it, to just perfect first cycle the escape, but you're not really going to.
Yeah. There's
like twists and unpredictable, I don't know what you call them, like booby traps.
You need to memorize the run.
You do need to memorize the route.
Yeah.
You can be reactionary enough to not have to worry about it, but it's pretty hard. So they could have done a couple things to change it, and what we might find out is that we actually had the best possible scenario. Maybe what we got was the best, but they could have either made the routes easier so that we could one-shot them, but would that have been as fun?
So that's a problem. Whether you make it easier or if you add checkpoints, you're cutting the drama then. And the point is, it's supposed to be climactic, dramatic, really edge of your seat sort of stuff. But then even so, if you get to the 10th or 11th, the drama's gone at that point anyway.
Yeah, on try number 15, you've lost it.
Yeah.
Like the times that I got great value out of these sequences was the first one and the last one, because the first one wasn't that hard. The water one was definitely the first time they did this.
Yeah, water one was good.
The water one was great because it was the right difficulty for it being your first one, and I think I completed it on my second try. I think I died once, right? And that was fine because I got killed. Okay, well let me just try this again.
Yeah, boot it up.
And you just run it right back. You know what's going on, and yeah, baby, rock it out, and you got a sweet escape series. Yep. And the last one, I got good at it. I knew kind of what to expect, so it only took me like 4 or 5 tries for the last one. But the middle one, I think, which was the wind level, I died like 12 or 15 times because I just wasn't getting the route down very well.
Yeah, wind one was long too. I think it was
the longest too.
Yeah. I think the water one was the strongest.
The best? Yeah, I agree. Also, the fire one was kind of the most kind of like violent, and the other ones weren't particularly violent.
No.
The water and the wind one seemed like there was just like a natural, organic nature thing happening, and you had to sort of get out of its way. But the fire one seemed like it was trying to kill you. The fire one was like straight up out for blood.
Well, I mean, the fire one was the last one too, so I mean, shit's getting real at that point. So what else do you have mechanically?
I'm trying to think. Some stuff to mention before we jump into story is they gave us a really good map.
Sure.
So we could always find out where we were, where we had to go. There were parts of the game where they took the map away from us, which I think is cool. Because games where you become so reliant on the map make you stop paying attention to your surroundings as much.
And just queue it up every few steps.
Yeah, you just take 5 steps, check the map. Take 5, and there was a whole sequence of the game where you were in like a spooky, like mystery part of the forest where it was sort of like a fun house of smoke and mirrors.
Yep.
And it said, your map doesn't work here.
Sucks.
That's fine. Also good to note is, as far as collectibles and 100%ing the game, is concerned, all those areas, the escape sequences, and the spooky forest where there's no map, these sort of instance-style places, they never had any collectibles hidden in there. They never had any parts of the map you weren't going to explore, so you wouldn't get map completion. If you did those sequences, you got all the completion out of those things.
Because
you never had to worry about it.
Yeah, you can't double up on the escapes. Once you do them, they're done.
Right, you cannot go through those parts of the level again.
Yeah.
In Valda's story, there is another escape sequence right after you fight. Depending on if you kill the Judicator early in the game and you fight the first boss again, I forget his name, Gilda's brother. You fight either the first boss of the game again, or you fight two of them that meld into one boss in the mana crystal mine. You have an escape sequence there too, and it's very similar to the escape sequences here, except there's usually no actual enemies in the Ori ones. There's only mobility enemies.
Yeah, you just sort of bash through.
Yeah. And in Valda's story, during that sequence, there's like collectibles that you can miss. You can go back to that part of the game, but like way later.
Yeah.
And you get one of the best armors in the game and one of the coolest assists in the game. You get Sir Pancakes from that escape sequence.
Sir Pancakes. This is a sweet game.
So Ori is cool because they don't lock you out of collectibles that you potentially missed.
Yeah,
I like
smart.
that. Well, one thing that we probably should talk about a little bit more is in detail some of the combat mechanics. We talked about Bash, but what does it actually do? So Bash is an ability which you unlock, one of the last abilities in the game. And I think it's the best. We already talked about it being the best. It's like number 5 or something like that. I don't know. But what it does is if you come into contact with an enemy, not even contact, but like very, very close proximity, right before contact, you get sort of a bullet time slowdown mode. So that happens if you come in close contact with an enemy or a projectile. And you get to basically launch yourself off of it. Mm-hmm. Imagine in some of those like cheesy anime sequences or like pre-rendered cutscenes of video games where something's collapsing and the protagonist is like vaulting off of falling rocks. You know, like maybe like a bridge is collapsing and
or like that scene in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, the Lord of the Rings new trilogy, the Hobbit series, where Legolas is like jumping on the rocks of a collapsing bridge. It also happens in games like Final Fantasy Advent Children. There's parts of that movie where they do.
God, we can
they do a lot of that.
Final Fantasy, can we? Even when Gino's not here, we're just continually referencing it.
So it does something kind of like that. But here's what else it does. Whatever you vaulted off goes in the opposite direction as you. So you can kind of launch things or redirect projectiles, which is really neat.
That is really... I forgot about that part of Bash. That is pretty sweet.
So there was one enemy type in the game that was like a little like boulder monster that would just explode if it hit you. But if you bashed off of it, you could launch it towards things and maybe explode like a rock wall. And that was really cool. There were parts of the game where you were combating flying enemies, and you could just repeatedly bash off of them over and over again to stay in the air like forever. And you just be sort of repeatedly bouncing from enemy to enemy while just like blowing them up with your projectiles, but you could just stay in the air almost indefinitely. Some enemies you had to bait them into shooting a projectile high enough that you could go up and like bash off of it and finally get higher. That was so cool.
That was.
Also, it made your mobility way better because I stopped caring about killing everything in the environment, which I think promoted sort of the like ludonarrative synergy of this game.
Oh, it definitely ties into the overall narrative.
Yeah, so you eventually stop wanting to kill stuff and want to just use your environment to make you better.
Mm-hmm.
So other abilities, I think you can probably hit on some of these too, is you get like a ground pound.
Yeah, there's stomp.
Yeah. That one's pretty useful for unlocking new areas. What are some of the other mobility ones the combat ones that we get?
You get, we talked about climb. We talked about the wall jump. At a certain point, you get the ability to sort of float.
Oh, true, gliding, yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of story tied, so we'll get to that one. But you can float. There's like a charge jump where you jump a little bit higher.
There is a charge jump.
But
That explosion thing that
yeah,
you can do with sign.
yeah, yeah. Spirit Flame too, where you just sort of burst into flames. But really, like all of these are just in service of Bash, as far as
Yeah,
I'm
really,
concerned.
because that ability is so cool.
Right? I
Yeah,
think
I can't think
that's
of
about
any other
all of them.
ones. That
Yeah.
that that that's it. Bash really is what did it for me. Um, Another game that did something similar to this is Dust Force, I think is what it's called. Dust Force is a
Sometimes
game.
I think you guys are making these names up.
No, Dust Force is a game where you um play as like a janitor who needs to dust things, but that's not really what the game is about. It's about racing from the start of a level to the finish, dealing with all the dust, but it's basically like one of these escape missions. It's like a time trial kind of game. Get from point A to point B in the fastest way possible with 100% completion in the like shortest amount of time. So
Gotcha.
it's like a leaderboards kind of
Yeah,
game.
time trial sort of thing.
Yeah, and if you like hit a like an airborne dust, you get your jump back. I think in that game. So you're like a janitor ninja. You jump up in the air, smack a dust, you get your jump back. Go to another dust, smack it, you get your jump back, and you have to like keep interacting with these
They're motes.
motes.
Individual dust units are called motes.
Yeah, but I think this is more like a cloud or like a hairball. I'm not sure. You got me on the semantics though. Gotta give you that.
Thank you. I have few skills, but that's one of them.
So I can't think of anything else really semantic or sorry, not semantically,
Mechanic.
mechanically. Oh, there is one last thing. This is probably the end. How the game treats saving. This is really
Okay.
cool for me.
Yeah.
So you can save in this game without stopping at all.
hmm
It's just one button on the controller is the save button, and you can do it just while running. And it creates a little save spot. So if you die, you just go right back there.
Yep. You
That
just, I
was
think the only constraint is there need to be no enemies nearby.
Yeah, no enemies nearby. You
Yeah.
cannot create a save spot in a spot where you would just get instantly blown up, so
Right.
that you can't lock yourself out of the game. But
Can't do
even
it in
if
those escapes.
Right, but even if you did lock yourself out of the game, it's okay because if you go to the load screen, you have access to like your previous like 10 or 12
Yep.
saves. So you can reload back in time a little bit. I love that. And here's why. I did accidentally lock myself out of a part of the game, and my completionist mindset was about to lose it until I realized that I could reload a save.
It's like slowly shaking.
Like I was trembling a little bit because I was having like PTSD flashbacks of Kingdom Hearts when I missed one of the Trinities,
What?
and I restarted the game. There was a Trinity that you can get in Halloween Town when like the house comes to life and you have to like go inside of like a Halloween Town house and then it becomes the boss. If you don't get the Trinity inside that house, it disappears from the
Yeah, it's
game and you
gone.
don't get it. And I missed it, and that was like 40% of the game. Hard restart. Just completely restarted the game.
So it just means you got to play more Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah, which is just always a benefit. All right, I think mechanics are done.
I think we're set.
For real, for real. Okay, so let's jump into a little bit more story. You took the first bit of story. I'll jump into story part two. The story
Okay.
of Ori, okay?
Story of War.
So, what happened with the original Storm?
Yep.
I think that was sort of like a natural occurrence, and Ori was separated, right? And life was good in the forest, even without its one little Ori, because he was just living with Naru,
Yep.
and as a like a little adopted child, and it was great.
hmm
Now we get to our antagonist, whose name is Kuro, right? Kuro in Japanese translates as dark or black,
Makes sense.
and the creature itself is this completely black bird rendered. I think it's an owl.
It is an owl.
It's an owl of some sort. It looks like some cross between like an owl and a crow, because owls typically aren't just solid black, like epitomes of blackness. Um, and this was definitely like some sort of meant to be evil looking
Yeah.
creature.
Yep.
So there's some friction between Kuro, who is an embodiment of darkness, and the tree, which seems to be the source of all light in the forest. So Kuro, in defense of its bird young, attacks the light source of the
bird
tree.
young?
Yeah, right?
It's like, who says it's chicks? It's eggs.
Chicks, sure, eggs, fine. I don't know.
Other than bird young.
All right, man.
It's tiny bird.
It's wee little down nuggets. In defense of its nuggets, it attacks and steals the light from the tree.
Yes.
And I think this is what starts sort of the decay of the forest around it.
True.
Right?
Factual.
So we find out that Kuro is on the search for Ori, who seems to be the last flicker of light in this forest, and it's kind of pissing him off.
Yeah.
Because he hasn't quite finished. Yeah, Kuro is a female.
Yes.
It's pissing Kuro off that Ori's still floating around. And we find out a little bit more of Kuro's motives. Turns out the light that emit from the tree is like damaging or dangerous to its species. In fact, that light killed all of her children, save one, who was still in egg form.
Yep.
So we see that
they were cute too.
Yeah, the original antagonists of the game, yes, they did steal the light of the forest and cause this terrible decay and death and infestation of monsters, but were their motives really that bad? It was sort of a self-defense, protecting its young.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we get to this sort of conflict. As we progress through the levels, we are unlocking and awaking these elements of the forest, unlocking the forest's water, unlocking the forest's winds, unlocking the forest's warmth, as the game describes. So basically, basically we get fire, wind, and water elements. We unlock those, forest turns back on, then we got to go get the light from Kuro, put it back in the tree, and everyone's happy. That's our overall goal and our motives for what we're doing in the game. But let's talk more about Kuro, who is the supposed antagonist, but there's a lot of stuff going on here. One thing that comes to mind is, as an antagonist, I wish that it's kind of hard to say, but they sort of took my bad guy away from me. Does that make sense?
Like, you're saying you want like a focal antagonist. Like, it doesn't have to be Sephiroth, like destroying the world, but you want at least somebody to root against.
Now you're the one bringing Final Fantasy back.
I know, right? Like that one was my fault, but
I'm trying to think of
how long his sword is.
It is. Let's think of a different bad guy, somebody who's just totally evil.
Ganondorf?
Ganondorf. Ganondorf just wants to take over the world, watch the world burn, whatever you want. I mean, he is just a bad dude, right? And we have a focal point for who the evil of the world is coming from. In Ori and the Blind Forest, we get a couple of cutscenes, like when we find out that the light destroyed Kuro's children, okay? And later, Ori actually meets the egg and finds the egg. This is after we escape the fire escape trial. Ori finds the egg and places Ori's hand on it and sort of gets like a flashback, like almost a Sixth Sense, kind of gains the memories of what happened and understands why Kuro is doing what Kuro is doing. Why Kuro was doing what she did, because her young were endangered. Ori gets chased away and basically knocked unconscious, but Naru shows up and sort of cradles Ori, and Kuro sees that Ori is sort of like the young of Naru.
Yeah, there's a mother-to-mother connection.
There's a mother-to-mother connection. Yeah. So Naru, who is mourning like the supposed loss of her young, sparks some sort of change of heart in Kuro, and Kuro goes and returns the light to the forest.
Yeah, in what turns out to be a kamikaze mission.
Because doing that
phrase?
Yeah, it really is.
Is that historically insensitive though to use that phrase?
I don't know. I would say it's more like a sacrifice mission.
Okay.
What's that movie with Denzel Washington where he's holding up a bank to get a heart transplant for his kid?
Oh fuck. John Q.
Yeah, John Q. It's basically a John Q moment.
Yeah.
Do something really badass, like steal, like hold up a bank, or steal like the spiritual light of a tree to save your kid.
Yeah.
But then in the end, you got to sacrifice yourself so your kid really gets saved. That's basically what it is.
Yeah.
So Kuro is basically the Denzel Washington of Ori and the Blind Forest.
Sure.
And I don't like having my villain taken away a little bit. Like I like the story. The story was good. It was touchy feely, but I liked having a bad guy.
I mean, don't you think that's a little facile though? I mean, shades of gray and all that.
Maybe I'm just too old fashioned. Maybe I'm not appreciating the narrative.
You want like old school Western style where it's like showdown at high noon.
Yeah. No, let me try to go a different direction. I think it made the game too cute.
Okay, I'll give you that one because
You could probably say this better than me.
well, I mean, we have that sort of. This isn't really a twee case, but I had a problem from a different perspective, same sort of issue, in them leaning on the tropes of motherhood so hard that like, oh my God, the love for a mother for a child conquers all. I think that was a move that made things just a little bit too cute, a little too obvious in the way you're describing. So I didn't have a problem with us losing our villain. I had a problem with us losing it in the way we lost her.
Right. Because we do lose another villain in this game. I think you wanted to talk about this character as well.
I forget the guy's name now though.
Gumo.
Gumo. I like Gumo.
Gumo's pretty cool. This is the last character in the game actually. We talked about Naru, who really didn't do that much besides be our mother figure early in the game.
Yeah.
We talked about Kuro, who was the blackbird owl bad guy. The tree, we've got Sane, but Gumo's the last piece. Gumo's pretty cool.
Gumo's like, you know what Gumo reminded me of? You ever see Spirited Away and you have the
little dust motes?
Yeah, the little ash bits.
From when she went into the boiler
room, yeah, that's what
the
Gumo
castle.
looks like.
Yeah, it really does.
So Gumo early on, he's basically a thief. He steals something. I forget what.
He steals the thing that unlocks the wind.
Yeah.
World.
Yeah. They basically
or the water world. Sorry. No. I think it's wind.
Wind. I think it's wind.
I forget if it's wind or water.
But you find out that Gumo is actually the last of his species. He lived in the volcano with all of his people, and they were eventually frozen as a result of this sort of spirit tree degradation. So when Gumo sees that, he ends up basically sort of helping Ori, and then later moving in with Naru once he finds out that, he was alone. Now he's not quite alone. And I think that was, still, a cute story overall. But I think that sort of bypasses some of those tropes the motherhood story really leaned on fairly heavily.
And see, I liked the way Gumo was taken out of the villain category because when we first saw Gumo was sort of like a bumbling villain, like not really a bad guy because they weren't doing anything evil. They were just doing something kind of like selfish.
Yeah.
And like just completely aimed towards their own interests. And when we got more development, or when we completed that level, Gumo turned from kind of not really an antagonist, not really a villain, just sort of like a bumbling obstacle figure, to now your friend. And I was okay with that turn. I wasn't okay with there being this ominous black bird figure that actually had great villain mechanics and great villains. Like I was so ready to buy into this. Great design. Yeah. I was actually afraid. There were some parts of Kuro's sequences where, like, if you were exposed for too long, you just get snap killed by Kuro, and the screen would get dark and ominous. And that was so good. It played up so much of that villain design, and then it's just not a villain anymore. At the end of the game, you just don't get that villain. You don't actually even fight Kuro. You just sort of win over Kuro's heart, and she kills herself.
But I think not fighting Kuro that's a decision I ultimately support because I think it ties into questions of scale, which are going to go further into sort of my next point later that I'll get to in a bit. But sort of the fact that Ori is sort of so small and so vulnerable in compared to something that's, when you think about it, owls are a rather, they're a cool bird, but they're a bird. I mean, birds aren't really that big or that frightening to most people.
You haven't seen like the wingspan of an eagle then. Those things can get like seven
Oh, those
foot
like downs and
reaches.
stuff
Oh
too.
man.
All right, eagles are hardcore. But my point is rather that the point is that this story is taking place in such sort of a small scale to the point that an owl it's a super predator, right? It's like if a T-Rex dropped into my backyard or something, right? Which is a good analogy because they're related to dinosaurs. But I think the scale of the story is important because it's trying to make, in multiple ways, right? It's trying to make an ecological point to suggest that, look, all this stuff is going on at this minor scale. So you look at a forest and you just think sort of tree. But then Ori comes back around and they're like, there's an entire ecosystem, an entire structure here. So I think if you use the owl as your focal point there, it creates this issue of, not even an issue, it creates this narrative of scale in which all this story is taking place in what's a very small, but ultimately much more complex environment than we like to think about it.
How big do you think, like, let's say if you or I just got transplanted into this universe,
Right.
how big would we be in compared to Ori? How big would we be in compared to the owl?
Well, how big are owls? I mean,
Do you
it's
think
like a
this
full
owl?
size tree.
I I actually feel like Kuro is supposed to be not human world bird sized.
Do you think like Ori is human sized?
Not human sized. I think Ori maybe like cat sized or something.
No, see, I think the point is that everything's supposed to be on a human scale because I think it's trying to make an ecological argument for the complexity of environments we might not look at as that complex.
I'm gonna look up some screenshots real quick, but I just feel like
I don't think there's any way to adjudicate it really
yeah,
because it's all bait. Like, what are you going to compare it to? Like, all right, how big's Naru? Like, there's no way to tell.
true. I'm trying to look at some parts of the environment and see what looks like a very common item, but most of the world is pretty fantasy, pretty
That's
fantastical.
what I'm saying. Even if there was a common item, there'd be no way to judge it because there's no external standard in this case.
You're right. I mean, I think I'm gonna stand by my argument that um like if I were transplanted into this world, Ori's smaller than me, but Kuro's bigger than me.
Okay, I'm going to disagree.
I think there's some parts of the game where you interact with like bugs or insects and they're definitely tinier, and you interact with stuff like flowers and like those like dandelions that like you blow the things off of,
Yeah.
and those seem to be the right sized. And if Ori, like if those things are the same size in this world as they are in our world, Ori should be like cat or dog sized.
Yeah, but again, I would return to ultimately you have to make a decision, right? And I'm making a decision that's better for the narrative I want, right? Whereas you're making an interpretation that more fit. Cause it's a question
How
of
come you're making a decision that just fits your narrative? Isn't that like a no-no?
no.
Isn't that like a Sherlock Holmesian no-no?
Let me give you an example. I'll give you a literary analysis example,
I
right?
won't get it, but go for it.
You'll get it. So if I took a book, let me think about a book.
You do a lot of thinking about books, Mr. English PhD to
Let's
be.
use Moby Dick.
I read a couple pages of that,
Okay, so if I wanted to do a Marxist critique of Moby Dick,
whatever that means.
right? If I wanted to make an argument that Moby Dick's about the struggle of the working man, I could
Okay.
do that, and I would highlight certain details. I would interpret certain ambiguous details differently. Whereas if I want to do like a post-colonial or no, let's not even do post-colonial. Let's do if I want to do a queer theory interpretation and look at the relationship between Ishmael and Queequeg, right? Like, oh man, they're sleeping in the same bed. What's going on here, right? That's a very dismissive interpretation, but that's just to sort of point out what I'm talking
Yeah, I
about.
got you.
Then again, I would interpret it other details differently. I would interpret ambiguous details in a certain way, right? Which is just to say that at its heart, any sort of story doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's about the frameworks you apply to it. And I'm applying an ecological framework to Ori, which makes certain ambiguous details shade in one direction or the other. So it's just we're applying different frameworks, because really you can't say a story, quote unquote, means anything on its own.
All right,
That's
so
like, that was a crash course in about 100 years of literary theory development, but I gave it to you.
my brain just didn't get it all,
Yeah,
but I'm gonna try to just roll with you as much
hopefully
as I
some
can.
of our listeners got like at least a glimpse of it.
Um, I still feel like the scale of the game for me needs to be on a more human level. Like I think Naru is probably close to our height or
Close
like a
to
little
person
bit
size.
bigger,
Yeah,
close to person sized.
yeah,
I
that's
think
legit.
So if I want to put Naru close to person size, then Kuro's definitely bigger.
Yeah,
I like to
Kuro's
think of
terrifying, man.
Kuro as being like a dragon, but like an owl instead.
Okay.
If you took the skeletal framework of like a dragon or that kind of monster, but just made it a blackbird instead. I think that's what this scale is more like. And maybe we just disagree on the
Do you
scale.
think that's because you ultimately want Kuro to be a little bit more sinister than she might have ended up? And if you make it a giant ass owl, that's a lot more sinister.
I just feel like if this game was supposed to be on micro scale, it would have made it more clear that it was on micro scale.
But I think that would have dismissed the ecological narrative.
I
Like,
don't think
because
it would have.
I think what they're trying to suggest is, even though this is happening at a much smaller scale, it's still just as important as these processes going on at a much larger scale. So if you bring it up to a larger scale, that suggests it has to be big to be important.
All right, so if Kuro is actual bird sized,
Right.
how big would that make Ori? Like
Small.
fly sized?
Yeah, like tiny.
It's like super tiny.
Yeah.
Then how are we going to have like 12 wildly different environments? I'm kind of getting too mathy about this, but think about the body length of Ori, how many body lengths it takes to go from one world to the next. That's some kind of quantifiable number.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, okay, we're going to get into my second point here, right? So, Billy, have you heard of the Wood Wide Web?
You've
I
mentioned
know
it
you've heard.
before. You asked a load. Why even ask that question?
Because I
You're
want,
really
regardless.
hypothetically asking, listen, hey guys, do you remember Wood Wide Web?
Yeah,
LOL.
the Wood, WOOD, Wide Web. So the Wood Wide Web refers to, like, if you go to the forest,
All right, I'm
connected,
imagining being in the forest.
you're in the forest, connected, all these trees, they're connected through this network of fungus, basically tendrils, that connect all these trees, right? And if you take a super small cross section of dirt, super small, there are miles and miles of this stuff. It's so fine and it's so interspersed, right? And they connect all these trees to basically these nodes that are these huge ancient trees that help deliver nutrients around the forest, right? Like the spirit tree. So I think Ori's relying on this idea of, whether it's creators know it or not, the Wood Wide Web. So what this gets to our scale question is, this is happening at an incredible, incredible density within an incredibly small space. So I'm saying it becomes a metaphor or an allegory. I'm not really sure the difference. I probably should be. But it's a
I
metaphor.
think the difference is that an allegory has to be like super long and drawn out.
I think it's more, yeah, it's like a question of how explicit is it. But regardless, right? It's a stand-in for this question of environmental density. So you have this incredible density of environments in this incredible small space to emphasize all these incredible processes and layers that are happening beneath our perception just because they're on such a smaller scale.
I think
Trees, man.
trees, man. So I would buy into that kind of environmental commentary if it was a game like Oddworld, and we talked about that. If you remember
Yeah.
the person that we brought on for the Oddworld podcast,
Yep.
who had a lot of in-depth analysis about the other Oddworld series, um, I would buy into an environmental commentary like that. I'm not sure I buy into this one wholeheartedly. Like I get,
Well, you can go
and I
fuck
think,
yourself then, Billy.
all right. So if if we take the scale question out of it, I think I can buy in more. Right? If you just let it be a very large, interconnected, explicit kind of web, but you kind of have to have it being subtle
I
and
want it
small.
small. Yeah, I want
I
it
think
small.
you just want it to be small and subtle. It doesn't have to be, I think, for your model to work. I think I think you just like it better.
Do you think it's because I'm so small and subtle that like I feel an affinity for this narrative?
I think you're a very large man, Pete,
Yeah, you're right. I am.
and subtle. I don't think you are, but um, I will say that you have a a dryness that I can appreciate.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate you appreciating my dryness.
So now that we're done with the slap and tickle, what's really going on here with Ori? We have this sort of beautiful visual experience, this narrative of of reversing decay,
Yep.
right? The forest is in a state of decay, you reverse it. You want to bring things back to life. I have a small problem with some of the gameplay now because it seems counterintuitive to what the overarching theme is. My friend Tyler Morgan, who has been on podcasts with me before, told me of this term that is used in gaming, and it's called ludonarrative dissonance. This
Gino's used this term too, hasn't
it has been used. It is sort of like it's like a vocab word in game theory. I'm gonna find out uh, who actually coined it. It was coined by Clint Hocking,
he? Okay. Who is
and
that?
he was a former creative director of LucasArts games. Then he worked for Ubisoft,
So a heavy hitter.
and it was originally aimed at the BioShock series.
Okay.
So the first BioShock game has an example of ludonarrative dissonance, and I might be messing this up because I just don't know enough about it. But basically,
Never admit it, Billy. Pretend
yeah,
you're an
because
expert.
this is the only time I'll ever admit to maybe like not knowing something, and it's because it'd be kind of like plagiarism. If we're like,
Right.
if I'm not producing digital content that I want to stand behind, and you just meet me on the street, I'll make some shit up and just fucking tell you about it in a way that's so charismatic.
Yes.
You just believe that I'm the source
Well,
of all. I'm like main line in
the
the
first
secret
half
truth
of
of the
that,
fucking
I'll give you.
universe, right? Okay, so anyway, in Bioshock, there is this theme of self-interest in the gameplay,
Hmm.
but the story is supposed to be like a selfless kind of story. And so the narrative tries to get you to feel one thing, but the gameplay makes you do something that's contradictory to it. And so there creates this like friction, this dissonance between the gameplay and the narrative.
Hmm.
So Ludo is like ludology is game study and narrative is narrative. So ludonarrative
From the Latin.
dissonance, yeah, from the Latin word for game, I think is ludos or
Ludus?
something. I don't know. Ludus, whatever.
Yeah, you do US maybe?
So here in Ori, your original goal is to bring everything back to life,
Hmm.
and you do that by killing everything you come into contact with.
Hmm.
So if you have these monsters and bad guys in the forest, like they're usually not demons that
No,
are clearly plaguing with. It's like a spider,
yeah,
or
or a
like a
boar
jumping
sort of thing.
grasshopper, yeah, or like a ram, kind of stone boar,
Yeah.
or a bird. Like these things seem pretty organic and natural, and you kind of have to murder them to get from one place to another.
Yeah.
So it seems like at first there's dissonance. It kind of solves its problem when we get the bash ability. Because now that we have become a more refined version of Ori, a better guardian of the forest, we don't care so much about killing things. We care more about accomplishing our objectives.
Yeah.
And
Forward
now we have
momentum.
this, for momentum, and now we have this sweet, non-lethal way of avoiding combat and avoiding conflict.
Yeah.
Because if an enemy rushes at us, we can just say, hey, I see you. I'm going to rush right past you and we're going to part ways. Yeah, sometimes they get like thrown into a wall and die, or they take some damage, but most of the time you can become a pacifist if you just use your mobility really well. And I think that took a ludonarrative dissonance and then created a ludonarrative synergy out of it later in the game.
Solid
So
point.
hands or hats off to the makers of Ori and the Blind Forest, whether they knew it or not, making something that was pretty damn cool.
Yeah. No, it's a real solid point. And the more I think, I mean, this returns to sort of my narrative issue, but the more I think about it, I might be a little ambivalent about the idea that Ori can fix this problem. It sort of presents.
Do you think it's too big for something that Ori maybe is too small to fix this problem?
No, I think it's an environmental issue. That again, it's
How are
sort
you
of.
gonna say you want it to be all small, but now small creates a
No, it's not.
problem?
It's
Like,
not an issue. It's not the small isn't the issue. It's the solution that's the issue. Insofar as it almost seems like the suggestion that if we just sort of, you know, technique or technologize. I mean, this might just be my hangups, but we can technologize our way out of climate change, which always seems like a problematic approach. That like, we don't have to change our behaviors because eventually, you know, science or technology will work us out.
but what actually solved the problem in Ori in the Blind Forest?
Yeah, it was the owl. I know. I think I'm putting an interpretation on the story at this point, not previously, but at this point, that the
Yeah,
story
okay.
might not sustain.
I mean, come on, like we're just kind of shooting the shit off the cuff
Yeah,
here.
we're doing our
Um,
thing.
People probably realize by now that we don't write a fucking script for this stuff. So a lot of the stuff that we talk about happens organically.
Yeah. Ooh.
Um, so so I'm trying to think about the game in general. There's one other thing that kind of bugged me, and I can't say that it bugged me. I'm really having to sort of channel Gino here
All right.
because I know like my friend's not
So
here,
I'll pull on my Psychonauts t-shirt.
but he would probably bitch and moan about the difficulty because there were some parts of the game that were hard. And I think that this game becomes really, really fun. You get so much out of it when you become a master of all of its systems.
Yeah. You know what it reminds me of in that way? It's almost like Mirror's Edge. Like when you really get into a flow, like it's really good. But when you fall out of that rhythm, that's when
You
it
just
gets bad.
repeatedly die, and like
Yeah.
it becomes a vicious cycle of having to repeat stuff over and over
Yeah,
again.
that's I get I mean it's another run game. You need to create your run and you need to
hmm
execute it.
And so for Ori, I think it's not so much run creating, but if you don't play the game in sort of like this optimum kind of way. I mean, there may be more than one solution. Maybe you just really like wall jumping a lot.
Hmm.
Maybe you really like the bash ability. Maybe you really like using the explosion mechanic and just running through enemies and saying, I'm not going to actually fight you. I'm just going to have an explosion charge. And I go into a big crowd of enemies and just go, boom, great. I like to see explosions. Like, whatever your flow is can work for you. But if you ever miss a button sequence and you fall, for example, I'm thinking of an example of when, if you're in the area where you can use the feather that you get from Kuro later and you like float up because the winds updraft you,
Yeah.
basically. There's like 5 or 6 birds in that area. If you mess up your bashes on the birds,
Yeah,
you
you're
could just
done.
fall like forever.
Yeah, you're done.
And you never die. You just have to go all the way fucking around like the whole level again and get back where you were. So there's some times where your input sequences, if you don't do them perfectly, can get you killed or make you have to totally reestablish
Yeah.
your flow.
You're over
And I think
penalized.
you're over penalized is what I was really getting at. I think the game doesn't let you pick up your flow as easily, and that could turn some people off if they want to just kind of be more casual or more exploratory.
Yeah.
A lot of times going from place to place, you had to have really good flow to make good time. I'm not talking about time like you're doing some kind of time trial, but in order to effectively explore, make it still fun, you had to be on point with all your sequences,
That's a
and that
fair
could be a
point.
drawback.
But again, we have that sort of just a devil's advocate the situation. You have that contrast between really making a genuine reward for mastering these sort of, mechanics, whether it be bash or jumps or what have you, versus making it accessible. And there may be certain cases, like you said, where that balance has tilted, but we do need to recognize that balance exists.
hmm And so one thing that I think we can talk about in closing is the very end of the game, sort of after everything's said and done, and we've had Kuro go deliver the light back, and we see that Kuro's baby is okay, and Gumo and Naru start to sort of cohabitate, and you get lots of cool background about where these species came from. Like Gumo, for example, was in sort of a technologically advanced race
Yeah.
of creatures in the forest. They sort of built constructs, and that level was the whole like invert gravity kind of level, which was really cool.
Hmm.
And there was also like an underwater level, and something that was kind of interesting actually. I upgraded my skill tree to get water breathing before I ever needed to go underwater.
Yeah, very minor. At least early on, it seemed like a very minor ability.
I never figured out what the underwater breathing mechanic was like. I think there's like a meter.
Yeah, there is, and there are like little air pockets periodically.
Okay, well, either way, I never had to deal with that because I just got underwater breathing before I ever had to do that. I actually finished like almost 2 full tech trees before I finished the first element level.
Like, why? Why do these things?
I have a problem.
All right, well, get back to the story before we
So the story,
divert
yeah.
this again.
So the story is, um, Ori is revived by the whole forest reviving and the sort of re-implanting of the light.
Hmm.
Not only that, but petals from the tree start animating and coming to life, and there's more creatures like Ori, and now the forest seems to be vibrant and alive again. So we get this sort of good feeling, good, happy ending. Everyone's happily ever after. All the elements are reignited, and that's all cool. But then, what do we get? Do we get like a new game plus? Not really. So I feel like this would be an excellent game for sort of a new game plus kind of vibe, or some extension of the story, and we just don't get it. And I think you wanted to talk a little bit about this narrative decision, Pete.
Well, again, I want to phrase this. So overall, I'm sort of okay with it, just because, like I've said, I sort of appreciate things being an overall cohesive whole. But even if you wanted a new game plus, where would you ramp difficulty in this case? Like, you could decrease health or increase enemy health, but like we said, combat really isn't that central here, and it sort of operates more exploratory than anything else.
Yeah. Also, I think you have the definitive edition of this game, right?
Yeah.
I do not. So there is one big difference of the game, and it's that when you finish the game in the non-definitive edition, it's done. Your save file is like locked in
Really?
place. Yeah, you cannot play in that save file anymore.
Wow.
So I kind of got lucky when I 100%ed it that I didn't miss anything. Because when I did the final boss sequence, I was like, yep, I've done everything I wanted to do in the game. Let's go to the final boss. And if I said final boss first, then I'll go back and complete stuff, I'd have been shit out of luck. But I think in your version, you can reload your save file,
I
right?
think you can, yeah.
Yeah, in my version, you can't. And that's an actual important difference.
That is. I'm not happy about that.
I'm actually gonna load up Ori and see if there's any like difficulty setting. Is there a difficulty setting in this game?
Not that I can recall.
I think there is one. And are you gonna have the same kind of problem where you have a difficulty setting just for the sake of it being difficult?
Well, it depends
People
what
might
it
be able to hear
refers to. You're gonna have to tell me what it's called. Again, it's a rhetorical decision. If I don't even remember it, it couldn't have been that terrible.
Yeah, hang tight. I gotta make sure that I don't have the sound come through too hard. People might have heard the game audio, which wouldn't have been bad. It's fucking beautiful
That's
game
gorgeous.
audio.
If you don't want to listen to us, just boot the game up and listen to the audio for an hour and a half.
Yeah, basically. Turning Ori down. Cool. So let's see what we got here. Options. Yeah, there are leaderboards. There are
What a
leaderboards.
track.
Completion and time.
Okay, I mean that's sort of on there. Whatever.
So for example, I beat this game in about 9 hours with 100% completion. So actually, hey, I'm on the leaderboards
Hey, good work.
somewhere. Yeah, cool. Oh wait, no, I'm rank 14,000 something.
It's not great, but probably not terrible.
Yeah, who cares? I would get like top 1% leaderboards if it was like a game like, oh what was it?
What was that ninja one we played?
Mark of Ninja. I would definitely get leaderboards in,
Have you found
and
the
I tried really hard to get leaderboards in that game.
Have you found the difficulty settings?
I'm looking for it. I hope with that. Uh, there doesn't seem to be a difficulty setting actually.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything you could really scale in this case,
Yeah.
which I like.
So, yeah, it just says this is the
Yeah,
game.
this is it. Play it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, this is it. Play it. So, I can't think of anything else. Do you have anything you else want to cover about Ori right now?
No, man, it's a solid game, worth the play. Now that they put out the definitive edition, if you played the first one, you probably don't need to revisit it. But if you haven't played it, now might be the time.
And what do you think one of your favorite levels or favorite sequences of the game was? I think we might have to say like not including the sweet escape sequences, but what was a cool
damn,
level
dude.
or part of the game?
If you don't include the escape sequences, it'd be the reverse gravity in the Gumo level. That one was legit.
For me, I think it was the underwater level,
Okay.
and this is hard for me to justify because usually underwater levels suck in games.
Yeah.
But here, and it's also probably because I never had to deal with the breath meter.
I think it
I
would
just
be even better with the breath meter, to be honest with you.
Well, I found it just so refreshing. The environment was so crisp and clean, and the music was good, and
Mobility was good.
the mobility was good underwater.
Yeah.
It just felt good to me, so
Yeah.
I didn't hate it, and I like.
Not
Typically,
hating
I'm the kind
things.
of person. Well, no, I'm the kind of person who likes water aesthetic a lot. Just in real life, I like water aesthetic a lot, and here in game, I'm happy to see a water level not be shit. So
they,
yeah,
they cleared that bar.
maybe you're right. I just like it because it's not bad.
Whatever.
But
That's fine.
yeah, it's not so much it's not so much. Oh wow, some people are I guess are like hacking the game. It's not so much that um the level is not shit. I think it was a water level that was done really well.
True. True.
And I think other water levels should sort of take a note on how good a water level can be from this kind of game. I mean, that seems kind of like dry to say like, hey, this is a good water level. Like other game designers should look at this water level and build their water levels like
Well, I
it.
mean, with how
I don't think I can go that far.
with how historically bad water levels have been, I mean, any sort of improvement's pretty nice.
Yeah, so like not limiting mobility, but just having a very cool aesthetic change.
Yeah.
In all the Mario games, the water level's kind of bad. Zelda games, water level's kind of bad. Metroid games, water level's kind of bad.
Kirby games,
Yeah.
water level's pretty bad.
So here we have a water level where your movement's not naturally just garbage, and the aesthetics work out well, and there's good music, and yeah, it's just really, really cool.
Yeah, just solidly executed.
Did you have a favorite boss fight or enemy type?
Nah, I mean, like we've said, the boss fights are sort of meh. I guess the RAM for the enemy type, just because you got to deal with them a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
You had to use your ground pounds for those?
yeah, or avoid them and make them run into a wall.
Yeah, I really liked the jumping enemies because
Okay.
they were one of the first times that you could sort of have a secondary impact in your environment because some of those enemies could like break floor breakables for you.
Yeah.
They could sort of like replace the ground pound that you didn't have.
Yeah, so it
You know
seems,
what I'm
yeah,
saying?
yeah, we're sort of approaching this from different angles. Like I like the exploratory capability of the Rams, where like if you didn't have that dash ability yet, they would charge through stuff for you. Whereas,
Oh yeah,
like
yeah, true, true.
the jumping things that break the floor. Yeah, similar ideas, just executed slightly differently.
Mm-hmm. Did you have anything that you really didn't like about the game from a combat sequence or an enemy type?
I mean, maybe the auto shots from Sign. What did we agree on?
Sane, I think is
Sane?
how it's pronounced.
Yeah, the auto shots are just kind of boring. But like we
I
said,
th-
that's not necessarily the focus here.
yeah, I don't think I would have liked it if it was sort of a Mario Galaxy type shooting mechanic. I don't know if you played that game or not, but Mario Galaxy has like a Wiimote cursor on the screen that you can sort of shoot little like star bits at.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want to line it up like that.
Yeah, it might make it too exact, too demanding.
Yeah.
But here the middle ground was it just auto locks on if you're within range. But then again, that sort of kept the flow nice because you could just sort of run through a crowd of enemies and just blah, 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 and they would all just die.
Yeah, that's what we're saying. It's not combat focused.
Oh, I mentioned earlier in a thought that I didn't finish when I said I think people were hacking the game. There was a person on the leaderboards with a 35-second clear time with 100% completion, and I feel like that's just not possible.
Probably not happening.
I feel like that's not happening. There's also like a 16-minute one.
With 100%, no way.
With 100%, no way. And then the rest of them get to be like an hour. I'm like, okay, I could probably buy an hour.
Yeah, hour could happen.
An hour could happen because all the hour times are like kind of close, and there's like a casual like, oh, it goes from 56 minutes to 16 minutes to 35 seconds.
Yeah, probably.
And that seems like someone is probably like,
why would you bother hacking the Ori?
Hacking the game. Like, I don't know, man. I don't know. I do have the best completion among all of my friends.
Good work.
I have 100% game completion, and I'm currently the only one of my friends that has 100% completion.
Makes it all worth it, doesn't it?
Yeah. I also have the most deaths. That's mostly because if I wanted to break the game or break the mobility, I'd have to try things so many times that if I failed would result in my death.
Yeah.
Like I would say, oh, like I have a triple jump and this glide. I'm just gonna like try this one jump sequence 20 times and see if I can make it work, and I'll optimize my jumps, and eventually I'll say, okay, that jump sequence is probably the best. I can't do it any better, and I still can't make it. I'm gonna move on from the game. But sometimes I'd like somehow like get one pixel high enough, and I'd be able to catch a ledge or something and get someplace that I shouldn't have been. I fucking love that shit in games.
You're a mess, man. All right.
You're a literary juggernaut compared to me.
I think that about wraps it for Ori, though. I don't have anything else.
I don't have anything else either. Let's go ahead and put this thing to bed.
Let's do it.
So, final thoughts on Ori, your concluding analysis.
I think it's a gorgeous game. I think it does some interesting things, especially when we look at the bash mechanic. Yeah, especially if it goes on sale, I would snatch it up. I think it's worth a get.
Yeah, I would definitely say it's worth playing. It is, in my case, a buy. I would actually buy this game even if it wasn't on sale. I would just say, get this game. It is going to be worth the money.
Yeah.
I want to support the developers by giving them my dollar bill so they make more good games like this. Some of the things that stood out to me were obviously the music, the aesthetics, 10 out of 10. The combat sequence was easy enough so that it was inclusive for all levels of gamer. But then if you took the time to master it, your experience got enhanced, and mine did. So I like that. I think it did cool stuff with narrative, in that point that I made about initially having this dissonance, but then it created sort of a synergy later because I was incentivized to not kill things because it helped me achieve my goals better than killing things achieve my goals before. One drawback that I had was I think it had a weak antagonist setup, and I think them taking away a villain by just making everybody feel good and have like sort of a bleeding heart moment for Kuro said, well, now I don't have a bad guy, we're all just going to sing Kumbaya now. Okay, sure. That was sort of my only downside of the game. Otherwise, this is a knock out of the park game. Probably going to be a contender for some awards for the Deep Listens Game of the Year stuff. So I think that about wraps it up.
Yeah.
Thank you everybody for listening. Do send us some feedback. If you want to get in touch with the podcast, hit us up at deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. On social media, you can find us at deeplistenspod. And so hit us up on, like I said, Libsyn, Stitcher, Radio FM, iTunes. Rate and review us on iTunes. Get at us on our Twitter account. Whatever you want to do, send us some feedback. We love hearing from you guys. And stay tuned. I think it's time to pick the next game. Oh, shit.
You up?
Yeah, I'm up. I'm torn because I wanted to play this one game, and I don't know if we should play like a full, long game or do something kind of different. I'm going to just sort of mentally flip a coin in my head. Alright. We're gonna play kind of a shorter game because we're kind of getting jammed up with Gino being gone, and we had a couple podcasts to do back to back. I'm gonna pick sort of a short and sweet game. I'm not sure how it's gonna play out, but I'm gonna select Tengami. I think that's what the game is called. Let me confirm.
Yeah,
That's
find out the name.
if that's what it's called. I want to make sure that I'm calling out the right game. It's been in my library for a while. Uh, yes, yes, yes. Tengami. So one of the notable things about this game is that it's designed as like a pop-up book.
Okay.
So the world is built to be like a paper cutout like pop-up book.
All right. Let's do
And
it.
so I saw a trailer for it, thought it was cool. It was actually in like a Humble Bundle that I bought a while back, and so it's just been sort of sitting in my library, and I think I want to play Tengami. I think it's going to be a real short game, so Gino can probably fit it into his busy schedule. And yeah, that should be it.
That sounds good to me, man.
It seems like the average playthrough is like 90 minutes for this game,
Okay.
so it's going to be short and sweet.
All right, let's bang it out.
So that's it. That's it for the podcast. That's Ori and the Blind Forest. Highly recommended by both Pete and I.
Mm-hmm.
So y'all should definitely check it out. So that's going to be all. Thank you, Pete.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Do some tree research. Find out about your local trees.
Yeah, get in touch with that wood wide web. Thank you, everybody. Again, my name is Billy Rothard, aka Rothgar. Hit us up on all of our social media, all of our email, everything like that. And thank you very much for listening. Till next time, peace.